All right, so welcome to our prep hour. As I said, the theme of the day is inference. And inference is a big deal throughout this test. In our GMAT roadmap book, I wrote an article all about inference, and I called it Logical Inference, the Secret Nexus, because I found that so much of this test is about inference. So yeah, just as Maddie's saying, inferences are really helpful for both. They make a big difference throughout the test. So much of this test is really just testing, what do you know? Right? Think about a data sufficiency question. They're wanting to know, hey, what's X? But they're not asking you for the answer. They're asking you, what information would tell me what X is? Can I use statement 1? Can I use statement 2? Right? Can I really find, does that diameter really match the line here? Is that the diameter of the circle? Do I know? Oh, how funny, you just read that. Awesome. All right, well, glad you enjoyed that. So that's really important on the quant side. In verbal, critical reasoning and reading comp both ask you for inferences directly. But you also see a lot of questions where inference is important, like an assumption question, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So the idea is basically run through these things. Make sure we know what an inference is. Look at what we can legally infer, what makes sense to infer, and then see how we can connect it to the rest of CR. It's going to be built into reading comp. Not half, the majority of what you're doing on reading comp is about inference. Hey, I read this passage. Now, what can I pull from that? What can I infer? And if we have time, we might also talk about ways to actually spot when they're asking you for an inference, because sometimes that's not obvious. So let me ask you this. When I ask you to infer something, what does that mean? What does it mean to infer something? It must be true for the conclusion to be true. To read between the lines and come to an unstated conclusion. Deduce based on what we've just read, heard, or seen. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Making a specific conclusion. Okay, so it has something to do with concluding, assuming, right? There's some disagreement, I think, of what some of you are saying about exactly what this is, and so I want to look at an example. All right, look at an example. Sorry for the clash with the off-white background here. The fact that I'm hiding something is pretty obvious. Let's say I told you this. Kim's favorite things in life are movies and comic books. Okay. So the question would be, what can I infer from this? What if I told you that I wanted to, what if I told you I wanted to infer this? When a new comic book movie comes out, Kim is happy to see it. Does that seem like a reasonable inference to you? Makes sense, right? If you have a friend or you are a person who loves comic books and who loves movies, you probably like comic book movies, right? I'm seeing a lot of people saying, yeah, sure. I'm seeing someone saying no. Any objections? What's the problem? Oh, they're two separate things. Oh, so is it possible she likes movies and she likes comic books, but she doesn't like comic book movies? Like maybe you like chocolate and maybe you like coffee, but maybe you don't like mochas. You know, you're like, oh, or something weirder. You like pickles and you like coffee, but you wouldn't want pickle coffee. You take the pickle brine and you put it in the espresso machine. That's really actually just sounds terrible. So yeah, it's possible. Now, in real life, we know that a lot of people who like comic books and movies really do like comic book movies. Someone's watching those things. They're making millions of dollars, right? And so, she probably does. She might not like them all, but it seems reasonable, right? What about this statement? Kim likes comic books more than she likes her family. Is that reasonable? Okay, so what's wrong with that? It's too extreme, and we want to watch out for extremes on inferences, huh? Well, The original statement doesn't mention her family. So we're seeing a lot of problems. If we had to pick one, if one of these had to be right, I'd like the first one better, right? I'd rather say she's happy to see comic book movies than to say she likes comic books more than her family. Where did her family come into this? What an extreme statement to make, right? Well, guess what? This is actually correct. This is actually correct. Now, they wouldn't have this statement on the GMAT. It's a little weird, right? But what did we tell you about what Kim likes? Are we seeing it now? If sometimes we can see things in retrospect that we wouldn't have. If the GMAT says this is the right answer, how would we justify it? We're a lawyer for the GMAT, right? How do we justify? Yeah, her favorite things in life are movies and comic books. I didn't say two of her favorite things in life. Some of the things she liked, right? Now, we're used to less precise use of language in the everyday. When we say something like that, we don't mean it. Just like how people say literally, oh my gosh, my head literally exploded. How are you talking now if your head literally exploded, right? But we know what they mean, right? Sort of. If I say these are her favorite things in life and that's it, then those are her favorite things. Everything else has to be below that. And that would have to include her family and herself and, oxygen. That's how much she likes movies and comic books. Okay. Whereas the first one, we don't know. We don't know that she's happy to see comic book movies. Yeah, she's not messing around about movies and comic books, right? We don't know that she's happy. Maybe she's never seen a comic book movie. Maybe somehow, I don't know how this is possible. Maybe she doesn't even know about the comic book movies. She's so excited to find out. Maybe she only watches movies on TV and she only gets like the classic movie channel. So she loves, Casablanca and the Maltese Falcon and, Gone with the Wind and all that stuff. She just learned about color movies the other day. Ooh, color movies, right? And then she loves comic books. But we don't know that she watches comic book movies, although it would make sense. It wouldn't surprise us. Sure, family is a thing. It's a noun. And I know I'm stretching things a little bit. So would the GMAT really talk about if she likes someone more than their family? No. But my point is that sometimes that answer that makes a lot of sense is wrong because it's going too far or making a connection that wasn't there. Whereas an answer that brings up something that wasn't mentioned can be right if it's, if it's covered by what we said. So if I say I only eat beans, beans is the only thing I eat, then you know that I don't eat cauliflower. I didn't mention cauliflower, but if I only eat beans, of course, I don't eat anything else, right? And so sometimes new information is okay. Sometimes extremes are okay, but they have to make sense. Now, what we're more likely to see is something weak. And maybe those of you who are not liking the extremeness, you were looking for something more like this. You might see an answer that says something like, Kim, has read a comic book. Well, that seems likely. If comic books are her favorite, this seems much more likely. Now, we don't know 100% for sure that she's read a comic book. Maybe she likes them, but she can't read, right? Or she's had them read to her. She's actually blind and her uncle narrates them to her in great detail. But this is one, if they said which of the following is most supported, you might say, yeah, okay, she's probably read a comic book. That's good enough that we could probably go with it, okay? I could see an answer like this. This is dumb, but it's right. Kim has more than one favorite thing. Well, if she has two favorite things, then she has more than one. These are so boring that they have to be true, right? I could conclude that someone likes movies. Well, if Kim likes movies, then someone likes movies, right? These are very boring, bland, blah, uninteresting, mild statements, and those often are correct on inferences. Okay. So let's talk about what an inference is and what an inference is not. Okay. So what an inference is something that we know based on the given information. It is something that we know. It is not something that we guess. It is not something that we think makes sense. It's something that we know, right? So for instance, you wouldn't be surprised to find out that this person likes comic book movies, or you wouldn't be surprised to find out that she works at a comic book store or a movie theater. But we don't know that at all, right? Sometimes people will go with likelihood, right? What's more likely? That Kim writes comics for a living, or Kim is a teacher. Which of those seems more likely? First one makes more sense, right? But we don't really know. Honestly, what are there more of? Teachers or comic book writers? Right? In real life, we know that we wouldn't know this on the GMAT, but in real life, there's more teachers. There's tons of teachers. There's millions of teachers. There's not that many people who write comic books, especially for a living, right? Getting paid for it, right? So she's probably a teacher, right? That's just, I'm playing the odds, right? Even if she likes comic books, right? Now, again, this is going a little bit beyond the scope because the GMAT's not going to expect you to bring in those kind of real world probabilities. But what I'm getting at is we have to be very careful that we don't just go with things that seem to make sense, that seem to go together. Okay. So an inference is something that we know. We don't know what she does for a living. We don't know what movie she sees, if any at all. Maybe Kim is in prison and she doesn't get to go see anything, right? We don't know what's going on, right? And so that's really important. Like if I told you that you know, my sister is a registered Democrat and she supports Democrats in every election, or maybe I'll say she has supported Democrats in every election so far. Do you know who she's going to vote for in the next election? No idea. Maybe she'll suddenly decide she's a Republican. Maybe she'll be too busy to vote, right? Maybe she actually isn't eligible to vote for some reason, right? And so she can't vote for anybody, right? We know what she has done, and we wouldn't be surprised if she's a Democrat that she votes for a Democrat. Shocker, right? But we don't know. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. So an inference is not yes. An inference is not an assumption. A lot of people mix up inference and assumptions, and I saw a little bit of that when we were discussing in the chat. Be very careful. When they say, what are we inferring? It's not something that is needed for a conclusion. That's an assumption. It may be something where I read between the lines, but it has to be something that's actually knowable from reading between the lines, right? So if I say, oh, you know, those two sure have been spending a lot of time together, you might read between the lines and say, oh, he means they're dating. I didn't say anything about dating. I didn't say anything to imply dating. You use your cultural expectations maybe, and maybe the situation, if I'm gossiping about coworkers right now, maybe that makes sense, right? But maybe I mean, I think they're going to start their own company, or I think they're planning a surprise party for me, or, you know, something else, right? So all you can infer about those two, whoever they are, is they must have met. They've spent some time together. You can know those things. Okay, so an inference is something that we know. This is really, really important. So we have to watch out for traps where we go too far, where we're guessing, where we're assuming, where we're talking about things that are beyond our scope. Like if I tell you what does happen, do you know what should happen, right? So for instance, if I say, if you play football on the freeway, you'll probably get hit by a car. Should you play football on the freeway? Doesn't sound like a good idea to me, but I don't know what you should do. I'm just telling you what's going to happen. It's up to you to decide if you should play football on the freeway. Maybe you want to. Maybe you don't mind getting hit by a car, right? If I say that something happened a certain way, what would have happened otherwise, right? So for instance, true story, I met my wife working in a bookstore. So I might say, so if we hadn't worked at that bookstore, we wouldn't have met. Maybe. Maybe not. Maybe we would have met somewhere else. So we're always watching for those kind of things, those kind of patterns. Okay, so let's play with this a little bit. I'm going to give you a new statement, and I want to think about what we might try to infer from this. Okay, so I'm going to give you this. Just a second. Okay. So let's say I told you that product X sells more units than product Y. Anything that it seems like at a first glance we could infer from that? What's something else that we can know based on that? Well, careful, you're saying product Y sells more than X. You mean to flip that? Right, product Y is better. Careful, guys, you're flipping, yeah. So we can do the flip. Product Y sells less than X. Now, it's not very interesting, But it's true, right? Product X may be more popular. Well, it depends on what you mean. If you mean by popular sells more units, then that's definitely true. If we mean people like it better, not necessarily, right? Um, imagine that product X is Bud Light beer, and product Y is some fancy craft beer. It costs $20 a bottle. It's not necessarily that people like Bud Light more, but maybe that's what they can afford, right? Are is my is my Toyota Corolla or whatever more popular than a Porsche? Maybe not popular is not the right word. It just sells more, right? So I have to think what we mean. If we mean it's popular then it sells more, sure. But do people like it more? We don't know. Do we know if product X is better? That would make sense, but is it? Right? Are Toyotas better than Porsches? You might say yes, right? But we don't know that based on their sales, right? Maybe more of X is manufactured. Possibly product Y could be pumping out a bunch of items that they're not selling. So you guys are giving a lot of maybes, right? And so we have to be careful. We don't really know if they're popular. Is product X more widely available? That might explain it. Do we know it's true? We don't know that either. So what do we know? So see if you can spot any in this list that we can know. I really should have numbered them, huh? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So yeah, type in the numbers of any you think that we can know, right? I'll number them. 2 and 6 sure aren't very interesting, right? they're pretty boring, but they're true, right? Some people buy product X. Well, yes, if it sells units, someone has to buy it. Unless machines are buying it, robots are buying it, or something. I don't know. Product Y sells fewer units. So what are these? This is a softer version, you could call it, a weakened version of what we already said, and this is a flipped version. And these are things that we can regularly infer, just like we saw earlier, right? If I say this is more than that, this other thing is less, right? So if X is more, then Y is less. So these are common things to see. There's a softened version and there's the flipped version. Notice that a lot of these are trying to explain, maybe product X sells more because it's better. Maybe it sells more because it's cheaper. Those would make sense. They would certainly be consistent with the facts. We wouldn't be surprised to learn them. And if product X is better and cheaper, then you would expect it to sell more units, right? If it's both of those things are true. Even one might be enough, but we don't know them for a fact, right? We don't know them for a fact. Number 3 would also explain it. Oh, maybe X is sold in more places. We don't know that. Maybe product Y is unpopular. Well, again, it depends on what you mean by unpopular. I would want to clarify that a little bit. But if we mean that people don't like it or don't want it, that's tricky, right? If more people get their MBAs from San Diego State than from Harvard, does that mean that Harvard's MBA program is unpopular? That might not be correct, right? Sorry, Harvard. We all want to go to San Diego State. Not a bad school, actually, here in San Diego, but I won't say it's Harvard, right? So we have to be careful about that. Okay, good. So this is a case where the right answers are kind of, dare I say, boring, right? They're not very interesting, but they're the ones we can know. All right. Let's look at a different kind of case. I'm going to just throw this one at you with the statement. So once again, I'll number them, and I'm curious if you can see any that you think work. This is much more controversial, right? Everyone seems to agree about 6. Yes, I have some crops for sure. It doesn't make sense to say my crops if I don't have any crops, right? So I must have some crops. It's pretty boring, but it's true. A lot of you like 6. Be careful. Be careful, right? Think about it this way. If you don't get oxygen soon, you'll die, right? Hopefully none of you are having trouble breathing right now. If you are, please type that in. We'll call for help, right? But I'm assuming you're all breathing okay, right? But if you don't get oxygen soon, humans need oxygen. If you don't have it, you will die, right? But can I say that if someone is getting oxygen, they will definitely live? Yeah, we don't actually know that. We don't actually know that. We don't know that if we get the thing we want, that everything's fine. We know that we're in trouble without it. So we know we're in trouble without rain. But we don't know what happens if we get it. Right? That's the trouble. So we can get rid of 2. Can anyone see another one kind of like 2? Something that says something similar that implies that I'm good as long as I have rain? No, not 4. 4 is a bit different from that. Yeah, 5. 5 is saying all you need. That's like the code that's saying, hey, all you need is air. As long as you have air, you're good. No other problems. You're immortal as long as there's air to breathe, right? Wait a minute. Are we sure about that? Couldn't there be other problems, right? Speaking of raining, it is now pouring outside here in sunny San Diego. How about that? All right. Don't come here. You won't like it. Okay. Uh, so, oh, in Brazil too. All right. Yeah. It's raining all over the world, as a song once said. All right. So those things are actually kind of saying the same thing, right? Um, snowing in New York. Snow is not a real thing. You guys made that up. Okay. So no one liked 7, I don't think, right? We don't know that they don't need sunlight. They may need other things. And so that gets into the other thing too. We know that we're in trouble without rain, but if we do have rain, that doesn't mean that we're all set, right? And that's actually what 1 is saying. Uh-oh, we're getting the global warming hoax stuff. I'm not going to touch that one. All right. So we can cross off number 1 too, because there could be other ways my crops die. Maybe my crops died because locusts ate them, right? My crops died because the soil was deprived of nutrients, right? I don't know about that. I don't know about that. So we can cross that off too. Okay. So it leaves me with 3 and 4. Anything else I can definitely get rid of? What's wrong with 3? My crops need lots of water to survive. I mean, I want it to rain, right? Lots. Yeah, I don't know they need lots of water. They just need some rain. Technically, I don't even know, this is a stretch, but technically I don't even know that they need any. Maybe I need it to rain for some other reason. Like, hey, if it doesn't rain soon, uh, you know, the the river will stay dry and we won't be able to get the shipment of fertilizer that we need, or something like that, right? Yeah, if it doesn't rain soon, there'll be a forest fire, and that will lead to burning my crops down, right? My crops are fine. I can water them from a can, right? um, so we don't know that they need lots of water or even any water at all, technically, although you could probably figure they do. Whereas 4, you actually do know, because we know that without rain, they'll die. So if they don't die, we must have gotten what we need, right? This is what we call a contrapositive. This becomes much more of an issue if you're studying the LSAT, where you do a lot of formal logic. But the idea of this, and we just touch on this usually briefly in the GMAT, but with conditional statements, if I know this, hey, if no rain, then crops die, then I can flip it and reverse it. Flip it and negate it, I mean. If crops don't die, then there's rain, right? So you can in general do that. If that's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Yeah, we're not going to do a ton of this on the GMAT, but they do have conditional statements of the GMAT. They might say if this, then that. And so we don't know that if it does rain, they won't die, right? We don't know that. We don't know just the negation. I can't just say, hey, yes, rain, then crops not die, right? And I don't know just the reverse, that if the crops die, it was because there was no rain. That's what 1 is saying, right? No, 2 is saying, if rain, then not die. It's negating without flipping. So the general formula that we know is if X, then Y, then we can say, hey, if not Y, then not X. But what we can't say is if not X, then not Y. And we can't say if Y, then X. That would be a reversal or a negation, right? And again, this is a little heavy for the GMAT, but good stuff to know. Yeah, we know that rain is involved in survival. We know that rain is necessary to survival. Like, you know that, for instance, if I don't breathe, I'll die. So you know that if I'm still alive, I must be breathing, right? If I don't sweep Virginia, I won't win the presidential election. So if I won the presidential election, I must have swept Virginia, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't have won. They just told me so, right? So anytime you get the result that you wanted, you must have gotten whatever you needed. If I don't have $1,000, I can't enroll in the program. So if I enroll in the program, I must have gotten $1,000, right? That I have to have done the thing without which I would have failed. That makes sense? All right, cool. So you can think about this in terms of the arrows and the negations, but that might be more than you need. But you can also just think of it in terms of, what can I know? I can know that if something is needed and I get what I want, I must have had the needed thing. But if I get the needed thing, that doesn't mean I'll get what I want, right? If I need $1,000 to enroll in a program and I enroll, I must have gotten the $1,000. But if I get the $1,000, there might be some other reason I don't enroll in the program. I got sick. They're all full. They didn't like me. There's some other reason, right? If I need to apply to get into Harvard, then you'll know if I get in that I applied. But if I applied, do I get in? If only it were that easy, right? Secret, really, everyone who applies gets in. Don't tell them I told you, right? No, it doesn't work that way. Okay. Let's try some more. Okay. Now this one, you may have seen something like this before. So I'm gonna do it without the statements for a second. And then we'll try this on some official questions too. But let's look at this situation. What if I told you that people who drink coffee regularly live longer than those who do not? This may actually be true. A lot of people feel bad about their coffee habit, but I've seen a lot of good research about coffee. I'm actually one of those nerds who didn't really drink coffee and read enough scientific articles that I said, well, maybe I should start. I didn't do that for alcohol. I think the jury's still out on alcohol. I didn't start drinking, but coffee, yeah. So let's say this is true. What might you try to infer from this? Ooh, some people drink coffee. Stephen, I love it. You're speaking my language. Yeah, definitely. If people who drink coffee live longer, there must be people who drink coffee, right? And there must be people who don't. Yeah, absolutely. One thing to watch out for, if I say some people drink coffee, that doesn't mean some people don't. So if I had said, for instance, people who drink coffee have bad breath, that doesn't mean there's anyone who doesn't drink coffee. Maybe everyone drinks coffee and everyone has bad breath. It's silly, but I could do it. Some people joke that way. They'll say, oh, I only drink coffee on days ending in Y. Well, that's all the days, right? It's a silly joke, right? So, but here, since I've got two groups, people who drink coffee and people who don't, I know that those groups have to be populated. Someone's in those groups. Okay, what else? People who live longer drink coffee. Interesting. right? If these hold up, now in real life, you'd have much more complexity than that. You'd usually see something like, on average, people who drink coffee live longer. And so we don't know that every long-lived person, maybe you find the oldest person in the world and they've never touched coffee, right? But if I meet it, if in general, people drink coffee live longer than those who don't, that's more than we'd probably know in real life, then yeah, people live longer drink coffee. Ooh, coffee is a liquid. You guys are getting nerdy here. Yes, good. I love it. You're being super cautious. So coffee is a liquid, at least some of the time. Yeah. I can drink water, but water is not always a liquid, right? But yes. Okay, cool. Let me unleash you on some answers. See what works, see what doesn't. Six, we already established, right? Not everyone drinks coffee. Some people don't. Good. Seven, some people live longer than others. Yes, right? If the people who drink coffee live longer than people who don't, then some people live longer than others. It's not very hard to infer. We know some people live longer than others, but the GMAT didn't tell us that. Now we know from this, right? So don't bring in things. Sometimes people bring in things that are just obvious. Well, of course, more women are mothers than men are. Well, yeah, yes, that seems to make sense, but the passage didn't tell me that, right? Let's come back to three. A lot of people are wondering about three. Okay. How about five? Can we say five? People who don't drink coffee have shorter lives than people who drink coffee? What's wrong with that? Is it making an assumption? Ooh, interesting, right? Regularly, right? So maybe people, and we see things like this. We see results in real life where maybe drinking coffee a little bit hurts you and drinking it a lot helps you. And there's all sorts of things like that. For instance, there's an interesting study that showed that people who are moderately overweight live longer than people who are regular or underweight, but that people beyond that live less long. And so there can be funny graphs that go all over the place, right? So interesting, right? So if we had regularly, right, then this would be good. But without regularly, it is not, right? Regularly, right? We need that. So this is again a softened version, or weakened version, you might say. We have to be careful about generalizations that try to go too far. But if we just say if we have X happened, so X can happen, right? Is basically what we're saying. Then sure, right? If I say some people like comic books because Kim likes comic books, that's true, right? So four, interesting, not drinking coffee could shorten your life. Now let's say we said regularly. Could then I pass four? Is it true that not drinking coffee regularly could shorten your life? What about two then? Is two true? Does regular coffee drinking make you live longer? If I added regular coffee drinking to two, does it make you live longer? Do we know why these people are living longer? Yeah, yeah, right? What if I said something like driving an expensive car helps you get into Yale? Do you think that's true? Maybe, right? I don't think Yale's looking at what you drive though, right? But could it be true that people who drive expensive cars are more likely to get into Yale? That may well be true. But it's not because of their car, it's because of the other privileges they have. If you're well off, maybe you're able to get a better education, maybe you can afford a tutor, you know, maybe your parents gave money to Yale and that's helpful, you know, those kind of things. Yeah, you bought a building. Maybe people who buy expensive cars are more likely to have, yeah, legacies. Maybe your parents went to Yale and maybe you're like a fifth generation, you know, Yale student. And so they might let you in for that reason. It's not the car itself, the car is just a signifier. Right? The car is just a signifier. So we don't know why people who drink coffee live longer. So we have to be careful, even ignoring the bits about regularly. We have to be careful with 2, and we have to be careful with 4, because we don't know if it's actually the coffee habits that's the issue. And that's why you have to be careful. If you do see that people who drink coffee live longer, or people who are overweight live longer, or people who drink a little bit live longer, or something like that, doesn't necessarily mean that if you do that thing, you'll live longer, because we don't know why. Maybe people who drink coffee live longer because they need the energy for their job, and it's really having a job that makes you live longer. And maybe some people who don't drink coffee are unemployed, and that hurts them, right? Not to scare you if you're currently unemployed, you'll be okay, right? So that's something to really watch for, right? If I find that people who are overweight live longer, what if it's simply because some people lose weight because they're sick, and it's really being sick that makes you not live longer? And if you have 2 healthy people, maybe the healthy regular weight person, average weight person, will live longer than the healthy overweight person, right? So we don't know that kind of stuff really well without more information, which of course means we also don't know coffee is good for you, right? We can say coffee drinking is correlated with longevity. Yes, it would need to be proper, it would need to be regular coffee drinking, but we can still see there is a connection between coffee drinking and longevity of some kind, right? So correlation is okay, but we don't know that that coffee drinking is causing it. Yeah, it is missing the word regularly, I agree, right? So they might let that go on the GMAT, because they might still say, hey, okay, it's not regular, but still, we do see that when coffee drinking goes up, people's lifespans go up. But it, you know, we don't know what regularly even means here, like how often is it? But yes, ideally it should say regular coffee drinking, right? Good. Okay. So that's what we're looking for. So this is a really good example of correlation causation, right? You've probably seen that terminology before, right? So correlation is stated. Exactly. So anytime I see X and Y together, hey, these people drink a lot of coffee and they live long, or these people have fancy cars and they go to Yale, or these people smoke and they have low paying jobs, right? Does one of those things cause the other? That's always a guess. So anytime I try to say X causes Y, you have to say, well, what about Y causes X? What if it's the other way around? Or what about something else causes both, right? Or what if it's a coincidence? That's less likely on the GMAT. LSAT can be useful, but LSAT usually goes farther than we need. So it's something you can do, but it's not usually something I recommend. You have to really know how to sort out the stuff that isn't relevant, or it's going to be a waste of your time, especially when you're trying to study a lot of other things. So we can't say 5 is a valid inference because it needs the word regularly. If we have regularly, then it's just a flip, right? If we have regularly, it's like we saw before, it's a flip. If people who drink coffee live longer, then people who don't drink coffee live shorter, right? That would be a good old flip. Okay, so looking at the Yale car one, I could say, well, it's possible that driving the car helps you get in Yale. It's also possible that getting into Yale makes you more likely to have an expensive car. It's also possible that something else, like having a lot of money, helps you get into Yale and have an expensive car. Or it could just be a weird coincidence, and you know, if you kept looking, that data wouldn't hold up, right? Maybe, you know, maybe every time I see you, I have a headache, but you don't give me headaches, and I'm not happening to see you on particularly headache-prone days. It just happened to happen that way, but next time I see you, I won't, right? That's less likely to show up. Okay, questions on this? That makes sense? Okay. So how does this play out on the test? Sometimes you're asked to infer directly. Okay, so let's look at an example. This is from the practice problems on MBA.com. If you don't already know, on MBA.com, where in addition to being able to take 2 free practice tests, they have a bank of about 90 free questions. And we tend to pull from these because we're posting them on YouTube. We need stuff that's freely available in the public domain, so we're using that. So this is one of those. They're asking us what can be correctly inferred, so what we can know. So take a minute just to read these statements before we talk about it. So here we haven't seen any proposed inferences yet. We're gonna be looking for some in the answer choices in a minute. But before we go in, as much as possible, I always want to see, is there something that I know? Is there an obvious flip? Is there an obvious connection? Is there a generalization I can safely make? So what do you see? We see that increases in HDL lower bloodstream cholesterol levels. And we see the levels of HDL are increased by exercise. Any predictions of what the answer should say? Is that fair to say? Can we say that exercise can help lower cholesterol? People who exercise have higher HDL. In a sense, that's restating one of the things. So although you're right, Keith, they're less likely to have that as an answer because they more or less said that. Now, some people will rule an answer out for that reason. They'll say, oh, they said that already, so it's not an inference. And that's not true. If I tell you, hi, my name is Dmitry, you can infer from that my name is Dmitry. It's a very boring inference. Yes, I just told you that, but it is technically true. You can infer it. But if it ever seems like they're just restating something that was said directly, there's probably something else going on. Unless it's like a reading comp detail question where they just ask what was said. If it's an inference, usually we'll have to put two and two together in some way. Okay, so there seems to be a correlation between HDL and exercise. And it does say, again, regular exercise. Thank you, right? We got to watch for that. Notice here, though, they don't just say correlation. How do we know this isn't just a correlation between HDL and exercise? What kind of words do we see that makes it more than correlation, that we can actually see causation, in other words? Significantly just means a lot. That doesn't tell us that it's not just correlation. I could say people who drink coffee live significantly longer than those who don't, but that doesn't tell me if it's the coffee causing it. It's the increased by, right? Increased by. What that says is that's what did it, right? So if I say your odds of getting into Yale are increased by driving a fancy car, that implies that driving the fancy car actually increases your odds. Not that it's correlated with, not people who drive a fancy car are more likely, but getting the car will actually take your particular odds and improve them. So this establishes causation. We have causation. Exercise and weight reduction actually causes levels of HDL to rise. Now, what happens when levels of HDL rise? This is where one of you put this together earlier. It seems like that means your cholesterol is going to lower. So it looks like we can predict this, right? It looks like exercise, and I'm being a little loose here. I'm not saying regular exercise and weight reduction, but I'll just say it looks like exercise reduces cholesterol. I'm shortening it down. Now, in real life, we'd probably just shorten it down even more. I just filed this under, okay, one more reason to exercise. I'll keep going to the gym, right? I see another result that already supports something I like, and we say, great, right? It's like if you already want to vote for candidate X, and you see another good thing about candidate X, you're like, yay! But you don't need to do anything with it. You're already voting for that person anyway, right? It's only when you see it the other way, oh, that's a concern about that candidate, or oh, you heard something good about the opponent, right? That makes you think. So if I already plan to exercise, then I just go, okay, cool, one more reason. If I'm specifically concerned about my cholesterol, I might say, oh, it's not just diet. Maybe I should exercise more. Okay, that's interesting, right? But we can see it looks like exercise reduces cholesterol if you do it regularly and lose weight. Okay. Let's find an answer. So go ahead and give us your answer when you have it. You got A through E this time. Okay. A lot of you are saying D, 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 D. And notice they're very cautious. They say regular exercise. There's that word regular again. They say they add the weight reduction, and they say lowers cholesterol levels of some individuals. Because if you look at the original statement, it didn't say for everybody. We were much more broad in our prediction. It said of some individuals. So they're being very careful and lining it up exactly, and they're not promising more than they can deliver, right? Let's make sure we can see what's bad about the bad inferences. And that's going to be really important when we try to broaden inference out as a tool for assumption questions, strengthen and weaken questions, reading comp, math, all those things. We need to be able to spot bad inferences, not just because we want to infer the right thing and not the wrong one, but because sometimes the argument is based on a bad inference, right? We're looking at a CR argument. Even our essay is about this. The essay is going to have bad inferences and we have to point them out, right? So what's bad about the bad ones? So it talks about being underweight. So if you're underweight, did you lose weight? Did you exercise? We don't know. So this is not enough of a trigger. There's another problem with A2 though. Do you see what they said about your risk? They do not run any risk, right? So a couple things we can watch for. A has a mismatch. It's going from we lost weight through exercise to we are underweight. Those aren't the same thing. And it has an extreme response. It's saying they don't run any risk. We know that you may reduce your levels of cholesterol. We don't know there's no risk. Just like people who wear seatbelts are less likely to be hurt in an accident. But does that make them immortal? No, it's not that they don't have any risk. You know, they can still be hurt. It's just they're better off than if they weren't wearing a seatbelt. Okay, what else? C, the most effective method. Yeah, so that's ruling out all of the possibilities, right? So it's extreme, but also unwarranted comparison. We don't have any way of comparing. If I say that movies and comic books are Kim's favorite things, then I can fairly compare those to other things. Then she must like them more than her family. She must like them more than dessert, right? But if I say she must like movies and music more than I do, now I keep talking about music. I guess I like music more than comic books. Okay. But if I say, hey, she likes movies more than I do, well, that you don't know. Maybe I like movies more than anybody, even Kim, right? So we don't know about that. We don't know they're the most effective way. What else? Only regular exercise. This gets down to the drought thing again, right? We don't know that only regular exercises is needed, right? Maybe other things are needed. In fact, we know one, right? We know one. What about weight loss? Even in this example, we need that, but there could be other things too, right? Maybe the reason that the people are able to, increase their HDL by exercise and weight reduction is that they're not messing up or they're doing other health things. Maybe they're avoiding stress, right? Okay. B is trying to flip it. We like flips, right? We like the idea of like, hey, if you exercise, your HDL is going to go down, or at least it may. So it's possible that people who don't exercise have higher HDL. That's possible, but it's only some people. So we don't know that they have a high risk, and we don't know about developing. Right? It brings it down, but does that mean that you'll be at a at a particular risk, right? So for instance, let's say that studying for the GMAT improves your eyesight. I don't know why. Let's say it does. But does that mean that people who don't take the GMAT or don't study for it are at risk of having poor eyesight in late life? No, they're just not going to get the benefit, right? Wearing this magic ring gives you superpowers. But if you don't have my magic ring, are you going to be weak and pitiful? No, you're just not going to get the superpowers, right? So we don't know anything about developing high levels. We don't know that not exercising actually hurts you. It just doesn't give you the benefit. Okay, cool. So we want to be able to spot those flaws, and that really helps us when we come to an assumption family question. So before I move on, any questions or notes about this? Oh, yeah, I saw a few. Okay, is it a good idea to not read the other answers if you think you have the correct answer? No, always read all 5. Sometimes there's 2 answers that are very similar, very, very similar, and so we want to check. In some ways, it's like the lineup. If you witnessed a crime, they want to put the potential suspect in a lineup, and you don't just want to pick the first one you see. You want to look at all of them and say, is that person really in the lineup, and can I really narrow it down to one? That's how we're sure. So always look at all 5. Always, 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 every single time. Someone's asking about a recording. We're going to have this up on YouTube, so you'll be able to find us on YouTube. Taking notes, I'm kind of neutral on taking notes. You can take notes. Some people overdo it. I would keep them very light. The main point of taking notes is to make sure that you're stopping and thinking. I think the biggest mistake people make in verbal as a whole is that they go into the answer choices too soon. They go into the answer choices too soon, right? We don't tend to do that in quant unless we're working backwards. In fact, one of my coworkers was saying they think it's the opposite in math, that some people should look at the answers sooner. Hey, can I narrow this down? Can I plug in the answer choices? What can I do? On verbal, we go too soon. Instead of saying, hey, what makes sense? We just go, what about A? What about B? Right? And people will say, oh, B is the answer. And I'll say, okay, so B strengthens the argument. And they're like, yes. And I'm like, well, what is the argument? What needed strengthening? They're like, well, how do you know B strengthens if you don't even know what the argument was or what was missing in it? So slow way down and predict. So taking a few notes is fine. We have some notes on that in our books, but it doesn't need to be a lot. The main thing you want to know going into the question, into the statements, is what kind of answer you have to the question. So if it's an inference question, you're going to try to put 2 and 2 together, which here you could. We had 2 statements that went together. Hey, exercise improves HDL, and HDL makes your cholesterol levels lower. Okay, so exercise can make your cholesterol levels lower. That's an example of kind of a mathy thing where you just put 2 and 2 together and you have an answer. It would be like if I said, my daughter is an only child, and she's under 21, and in California, you have to be 21 to go to a bar. Well, then you could put that all together and say, Dmitry doesn't have any children that can legally go to a bar in California. If his daughter's only child and she's not 21 and you have to be 21, there we go, right? I didn't say that thing, but you can put it together. So that's one example in inference. Other examples of an inference would simply just be saying, oh, he doesn't have a son. Okay, daughter's only child. Or someone who's 30 is older than his daughter. It's the flip thing, right? So those kind of weaker inferences. So someone asked me to repeat the biggest question, the biggest mistake people make in verbal, which is not to, they go into the answers too soon, not stopping and thinking and identifying what they're looking for in the answers. Are there guessing strategies? I think our ways of getting rid of the bad answers are the best guessing strategies. What I'm looking for is what kinds of things I don't want. So if I had to guess randomly, I would go for a weaker answer. Notice that although D does say something, it says lowers cholesterol levels, it does make a strong statement, it's careful. It says of some individuals. Whereas look at E, only, C, the most, right? A, do not run any risk. Those are harder to say. How do I know that, right? How do I know that if you're underweight, you don't run any risk of developing high levels? I mean, imagine your doctor telling you that. You'd say, really, there's no possible way I could get it, right? That seems very unlikely. I heard the GMAT leans toward reading for meaning. Is that true? Absolutely. I mean, in sentence correction, there's a lot of meaning for sure. That's a lot of times when people talk about reading for meaning. But in reading comp and CR, it's all about what are they actually trying to say? What do we want here? Okay. So let me just do one more thing with you guys, which is to look at an assumption family question. It's not an inference question. But what are these? These are inference questions too. Why? Because they're going to have a conclusion where they're trying to infer something. and they're going to do it wrong. So take a minute to look at this argument. Take a minute to read it. Okay, so notice what they're doing. They're saying, hey, there's this statue. It may be genuine, but it has this uniform quality that matches what forgers would do. So probably a forgery. Now think about this as an inference answer. If you saw this as an inference answer, would you select it? Can we infer that the statue is probably a forgery from the fact that it matches that surface that a forged surface would have? Uh-oh. Impossible, guys. Impossible. If we could infer that, then how could we weaken this argument? The argument would be perfect. Remember, we're never going to weaken an argument by saying nuh-uh to it. We have to weaken an argument by adding additional information, but the other information still has to be true. I can't weaken a perfect argument, right? If I say, you have to be 21 to go to a bar and my daughter's under 21, well, so she can't go. There's nothing you can say about that. Well, true, right? True. So we don't know it's probably a forgery. We can't even say, well, she can't go legally, right? Okay. We don't know that it's even probably a forgery. Yeah, it could be a well-preserved original piece, right? There could be some other explanation. So probably is tricky because, of course, probably means we're playing the odds. Maybe the private owner used the chemical bath because they like it that way. So in some ways, what this matches is what we saw before with the rain and the crops one. They're saying, look, the premise says if they're forging, if it was a forgery, they would probably use a chemical bath. And the conclusion is saying, hey, if they gave it a chemical bath, it's probably a forgery. And that's not necessarily the same thing, right? If you, like for instance, if you cheated on the exam, you might get a really good score. But if you get a really good score, does that mean you cheated, right? If you have food poisoning, you may be sick to your stomach. But if you're sick to your stomach, does that mean you have food poisoning? Can I read the other way? I have to be very careful about that. So this in some ways is just that same kind of reversal. Even though this isn't the LSAT, there's that conditional reasoning kind of thing. They're saying if you see a forgery, it's going to have this chemical bath typically. But does that mean that's always what's going on? Right? That we don't know. So the same thing we can do to get rid of a bad inference is what we can do to get rid of a weaken. So be careful. If this looked like a good inference to you, you've got to watch out. Do we know enough to say that it's probably a forgery? Probably meaning that the chances are greater than 50%. Do we have that information to do that? We don't have that information. The other thing that's really important is anytime you have a strengthen or weaken or assumption question, the answer is can we infer the conclusion is always no, 100% of the time. You can never infer the conclusion because then we'd have no job. Right? So it's always tough. I remember I had a student years ago I was tutoring and I'd say, oh, what do you think of this argument? Is it good? And to me, that's a rhetorical question to be like, yeah, it's pretty good. I'm like, no, it's not good. It's terrible. So this is a problematic argument. So we need something to weaken that shows why we can't infer this. So last thing we'll do for takeaways is just try to find it. Give it a shot. One of you actually predicted this, right? But even if you didn't predict it, when you see it, you can go, oh, just any other explanation, right? And so what we'll see when they try to explain something one way, we're looking for an alternative explanation. If I say, hey, people get sick when they drink a lot, and Fred is really sick, he must have been drinking, we need any alternative explanation. Hey, Fred has the flu, right? Okay, so an alternative explanation, right? That's all we need. So in order to say the statue is probably a forgery, we'd have to rule out that other possibilities aren't very likely. So we weaken it by saying that they are. C, notice, doesn't disprove that it's a forgery. It was one time used by dealers and collectors to move the splotchy surface, but that doesn't mean that that's what happened here. It could still be a forgery. It might even still be really likely, but it weakens the argument. It makes it look less likely. It helps us understand why it can't be inferred. And so if you can get good at inference, you're going to get better at all of verbal, guaranteed. That is, I mean, it's so central. It's not, to be fair, very central to sentence correction. That's its own domain, right? But reading comp and CR and some elements of math are all about inference, right? Either directly, what can you infer? Or somewhat indirectly, hey, we tried to infer this, show us why that's wrong. Is CR inference similar to RC inference? Yes, very similar, the same task. The differences are, of course, with RC, you might have to go through more material. You might have to patch things together from different parts of the passage. Also, I've noticed a trend. I can't say if this always plays out on the test, but I feel like our CR inference is maybe slightly more quantitative in nature. You're a bit more likely to see sort of a numerical inference or a kind of a logical catch-22, whereas in RC inference, you're just putting together some information from the passage. Can I explain the bad inference in A? Yeah, I'm not going to go through all these answer choices because I want to respect the clock, and some of you may have places to go. You can find more discussion of this if you go into a online forum, including ours. But the problem with A is it's talking about what they can accept. It doesn't give us any bearing on its authenticity. So there's no bearing here on what caused the smooth surface. It's just talking about what they need, what the museums need. What's the ideal time for a CR question? About 2 minutes. About 2 minutes. You have a little less than 2 minutes per question overall in verbal, but that's because a sentence correction should only take about 1:20, sometimes less. Some people spend more than 2 minutes on CR, but that adds up pretty fast. And so I would get used to getting as far as you can, just like with quant, getting as far as you can in about 2 minutes. And then if you're stuck between two, that's okay. Take your 50-50. How can I read faster? That's a tough one. There's so many things that affect reading speed. There's our general processing speed with just written text. There's our specific skill in English and our vocabulary. There's habits. One of the most common things I think that gets in the way with our reading speed is constant rereading. And although it's important to stop and reread when something doesn't make sense, some people reread compulsively. So sometimes it's a matter of slowing down enough to read well the first time. I'll give you an example. I had a student who spent forever on a passage, so long that I was starting to get concerned. And I said, hey, what's going on? You haven't talked to me yet about this passage. And they're like, oh, I'm just finishing paragraph 1. And I said, what do you mean paragraph 1? Oh, no. And I realized what they were doing is they were reading and rereading paragraph 1, trying to get it perfectly. And rather than trying to get to perfection, we want to stick to our task. What is it that I really want to get out of this? I don't need to know everything. So if I'm trying to find the author's conclusion and what the premise supports in that conclusion is, then that's that. If I'm trying to read an RC passage and get the main point, then I'm reading for that. I don't need to understand every detail. Extracurricular reading, if you're reading scientific magazines, The Economist, Arts and Letters Daily is a great website for things in the arts and letters and the humanities. Those are good. You still want to practice with real GMAT passages, so you're getting used to being asked the questions and the right timing requirements, and so you have some check on your accuracy. I could sit there reading The Economist, and I have no idea if I'm reading it well or not. But yeah, doing a lot of reading is good. I mean, one reason that some people do better than others on verbal is they read a lot. And there's no shortcut to that. If you never read, if you're just in general are not a reader, that's going to put you at a disadvantage on the test, as it's supposed to, right? Because you're trying to go to grad school, and grad school has a lot of reading. But we can fix that with some outside reading. Don't overdo that, but it can be especially useful in areas that you're less comfortable with. Some people just really don't like passages, even CR, about science because they feel intimidated. Well, read enough that you're a little less intimidated. Absolutely. Someone's sharing some sources. Yeah, and there's a lot more on that. We have some of that up on our blogs as well. Okay, SC I can't talk about, it's just out of scope for today. we'll have to talk about that another day. But really quickly, I want to talk about any takeaways you got from today. So what do you want to remember from today? What do you feel like you learned? What's important about inferences? Anything memorable? Inferences are really important, right? Inferences are central on this test, right? They are something we can know, right? They are not assumptions. I'd be careful about the question, why did the author write what they wrote? Because that would imply a motivation. We don't know why they wrote what they wrote. Sometimes you find yourself asking that, right? Sometimes you question people's, say, political motivations, right? So a famous example, years ago in the 80s, when cigarettes were coming under a lot of fire for causing health problems, someone from Philip Morris went on 60 Minutes and said, well, you know, if you eat enough applesauce, that'll make you sick too. And you have to say, so what's his motivation? Well, it's clear. He's trying to say, sure, a lot of cigarettes is bad for you, but a lot of applesauce is bad for you too. This wasn't a great argument, right? But his motivation was clearly to get the light off cigarettes, right? But if I just tell you with no context, hey, if you eat too much applesauce, it's bad for you, you don't know why I wrote it. So we have to be careful. We don't necessarily want to look at why, right? So there's something that must be true, right? Yeah, so we want to be literal and not bring in outside information. We can bring in outside information in the very basic form, right? So if I tell you that, you know, my daughter is a child, then you know she's not a senior citizen, right? If I tell you that, you know, my house is on fire, then you know that the surface of my house may be hot, you know, things like that. But beyond anything like that, yeah, we don't want to bring in a lot of outside information, right? A couple other things you might want to think about. Good answers often, you know, good answer features. They don't always have these things, but flipped info, right? Where they just say, not the opposite, but, you know, instead of X is greater, Y is less. Softened versions, you know, generally speaking, milder language, careful, legalistic statements, right? So bad answer features, broad generalizations, unjustified extremes. Notice I'm being careful. Some extremes are okay. If the argument tells you that, you know, everyone in America is rich and all rich people are happy, then everyone in America is happy. Is that true in real life? No. But if it were true, then that would have to follow. You could take that extreme, right? So unjustified extremes, which include, yeah, it would include absolutes. We want to watch out for the wrong type of statement. And what I mean by that is drawing causation from correlation, or drawing absolute from relative. So if I tell you that I'm taller than my brother, does that mean I'm tall? I just gave you relative information. Taller than my brother, but how much taller? I'm lying too because he's not here. He's taller than me. You know, drawing should from does, right? So if I say, you know, Ken drinks every night, should Ken drink every night? I don't know. You know, playing in the street is bad for you. Should you play in the street? I don't know, right? So watching for those kind of things. Okay. All right, folks. Well, I hope that was helpful. And love to see you in one of our classes. If you need anything from us, let us know. If you have any final questions, let me know that too. Other than that, we're going to wrap up, and I thank you all for joining us. You'll be able to find this on YouTube quite soon. Thanks all. Have a great night or day, depending on where you are. Best of luck with your test.